Much. Thanks to Annetta and to all the brilliant introduction videos that you saw at the start there. What a fantastic group of people we're lucky to share this group with, and a great resource for EAZA. Okay, so my name's Jim, and as you saw before, I'm the Animal Behaviour Management Officer for the Zoological Society of London, and serving the EAZA Training Working Group as Vice Chair. And I've been looking at this particular subject for a while, along with the rest of the group, and we think it's a really interesting one. It's the economic value of zoo animal training. Now, I'd like to point out straight away that, as you've seen already with all the fantastic illustrations of training throughout the zoos from our colleagues, we shouldn't really need to look at the financial benefits because the welfare benefits are so significant. But this could be interesting if you're still looking to establish training programs within your zoo. So we're going to take a look at various areas: staff resource, commercial activities, PR, and veterinary procedures. And I've got a couple of examples here. Recently, we moved our Galapagos tortoise from one part of the zoo to a new enclosure. And it was a brilliant media exposure opportunity because these animals were trained to move across the entire zoo. And it was photographed by lots and lots of people, and we were able to do brilliant press releases about it. And at the bottom there, you can see a chimpanzee having an X-ray. So let's start off with staff resource. And first of all, I'm very grateful to Annetta and Henrik at Copenhagen for sharing this video. We often get asked in the Animal Training Working Group, how long is it going to train our animals? How many staff are involved? Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that zookeepers can do all the training in the zoo. And if we upskill our staff, then we can make training more efficient and more effective. And actually, it compares really favorably when you're looking at traditional methods of husbandry. In this video, you can see several keepers on display here, but in fact, there was 18 staff required for this simple routine husbandry procedure, which was moving the pelicans from their outside enclosure to the inside enclosure during winter. You can't see everyone here because there's lots of people off show that were doing the herding. And as you can see, it was done professionally and efficiently. But there is definitely an alternative, which is, of course, trained behaviour. And by the way, there are inherent risks with manual restraint, as you can see in this X-ray that shows a wing break from one of the pelicans during that procedure. So fast forward to the next year, and Henrik has now trained our pelicans at Copenhagen Zoo, the pelicans at Copenhagen Zoo, to respond to an audio recall. And he uses that audio sound to bring the animals inside. Now, first of all, you can see really clearly these birds are enthusiastic participants in their own care. Now, this procedure, compared to 18 people for half an hour, so it takes one person 1 minute just to press a button, and that's when the hydraulic door closes. So great antecedent arrangement to make this behavior occur. And what I'd really like to point out, which was shared to me by Annetta, was the emotional change in these animals to that area. That area now is somewhere where the pelicans seek to use, even when they're not being trained, and they've nested and laid eggs in there. So it's even increased breeding potential. Another example is with emu transportation at ZSL London Zoo. In this video, you can see 3 keepers, I'm the one in the middle, by the way, the short one, herding the emu into a small corralled area where we've got a transportation crate waiting, 2 transportation crates. We're moving 2 emus. This is a very short version of the full video clip that took quite a long time. It's a large enclosure. We needed to move the emus into one place, herd them into the small area, and then herd them again into the crate. Now, unlike the pelican video you saw before, there was no injury to the animal. But if you look at this, there is a clear risk to human health and safety. Now, obviously, we sign risk assessments, we mitigate as best we can, but it's a really important thing to consider. If a zookeeper gets injured, they could be on leave for a considerable amount of time. So it's an all important considerations. Now, you can see 4 keepers here, but there's also another 2 keepers to do this simple crating procedure. And as you can see in a moment, those 2 people are operating box slides. And overall, of course, simply put, it's quite a stressful experience for the animals. And the alternative is really, really simple. Here's Tegan, my colleague, who is training our 2 emus that were left. We were actually moving them from one enclosure at London Zoo to another one. As you can see here, we designed the emu crates, we built them and installed them. We built them with training in mind so that we made them really open with hatches at the back to train. And actually, once we did the initial bit of training, which was to get them to go inside the boxes, we could then just feed them a bit of breakfast in there, and the training was really straightforward. Daily routine husbandry, if you like. When we went to close the doors, then we added in a second person, so we were quite sensitive the way we did that. But as you can see on the day of the move, it just took Jasmine on her own to do that entire procedure. And as we know, positive reinforcement training can offer coping skills. And we find that when animals are released after being boxed, as Evelyn said earlier, actually, they tend to be much calmer when they come out. Now, unfortunately, when we moved these emus, they didn't habituate to their new facility. But it was fine because the boxes were still in place, and 2 days later, we were able to train them back into the boxes and take them back to their existing enclosure. Now, just a brief look at training for commercial experience. And what I want to point out here is that anytime you train an animal, you should be providing a net welfare benefit to the individual. In the UK, we're quite lucky because we have government guidance. The Secretary of State Standards of Modern Zoo Practice dictates that you must provide a net welfare benefit to the individual. But these things don't need to be mutually exclusive. You can train for improved welfare by still having a beneficial side effect of commercial activities. For example, we use an audio recall to move our giraffes from one place to another, inside to out, and then we can use that to bring those animals to guarantee a close contact VIP experience with our keeper for a day. Public relations and media exposure. Now, these can be significantly enhanced by the use of trained behavior. One of the things that the press team do brilliantly at ZSL is using light-hearted photo opportunities to provide really interesting details on our husbandry and animal care. Now, one of them is the annual weigh-in that we do. And so all the animals that you see in this slide here have something in common. They've all been target trained, station trained in order to be weighed. And that is routine husbandry. And we just use that training to enhance our media exposure. And a nice quote from the media manager at ZSL is that these light-hearted press photo calls can help us communicate a serious message. For example, we can talk about target training and how this helps keepers provide care for our animals whilst enhancing our media exposure. Now, of course, this isn't a direct income, but it drives ticket sales across our living collections, which is really, really important. Another example of the use of training to enhance our advertising and media exposure was when we launched Land of the Lions back in 2016. On the left there, you can see me station training a lion, and I work really closely with the team that looks after these at the time and to this present day. And our idea was that we were going to hopefully be able to use some training to provide a brilliant photo opportunity for the launch of Land of the Lions, which if you've got keen eyes, you can see here, there's some VIPs. That's the Queen and Prince Philip. And here there's a lion. Now, first of all, it's worth pointing out that the female lions that were part of the Land of the Lions opening were born at London Zoo. They went off to Whipsnade and came back again. And they came back to an enclosure that was 5 times bigger and much better for them. But it took them quite a long time to habituate. So we needed to provide training and enrichment in order to help them habituate to the new facility. And then we used those behaviors in order to help us with our media exposure. And here's a video showing one of the behaviors that we used to enhance that media exposure. So that's a simple audio recall, and this was really important when we were habituating our animals to this new facility. They tended to rest and stay in that one area that you saw them lying down, because that's what their old enclosure looked like. Then when we were able to add in an increased enrichment provision and also audio recall and target training and stationing, we encouraged them to use the entire enclosure, which was really important for when we wanted to open, both for the public to make sure the animals were happy in their new habitat, but also when we wanted to launch this and advertise the area to the public. And as you can see, just using that simple audio recall, it enabled us to get them really close up to areas that we knew were going to be important for that royal opening, and also for when we opened to the general public. So on the day itself, this is what it looked like. Here you can see the lions calmly moving through the new habitat, listening out for that audio recall. And we were able to position them in certain areas to maximize our publicity, if you like. But the lions, of course, are completely none the wiser. From their point of view, they're just moving around the enclosure, doing their training, taking their scatter feed. And in the meantime, we're able to, part of the program that we used to train these was to add in extra members of ZSL staff instead of just the keepers to enable us to habituate these animals, having lots and lots of people in one go, as you can see in this picture there. Now, the same day that we did this royal event, we finished up and the lions were happy and everyone was happy in the zoo. We started to see the effects of this media exposure. It went worldwide. And the same day we started to see lots of images coming back from different newspapers around the world and videos played in news networks. And it was a really important way to advertise both the opening of the enclosure and our conservation work in India. And here is the Queen meeting one of our conservation partners. And this training program, well, it was really helpful in providing great access during that press launch. And the press team estimate that it was £2 million worth of free advertising for ZSL. And the way that the press team tell me about this is that media exposure has an enhanced value if you don't pay for it. If the news network or the newspaper put your picture or your video onto their network, then it acts as an endorsement. So it has greater value than if you pay for it. So moving on to veterinary procedures, I'm just going to point out here that all the examples I'm going to use are purely from ZSL. So they may not apply to your own collection, but it's just examples that I wanted to use. So I asked my colleagues in the Wildlife Health Services how much it costs to do an anaesthetic on an animal. And they gave me the example of Effie, our Western lowland gorilla. And these are the drugs, the table of drugs that we use. Now, I found this quite interesting because I had this assumption that the drugs were going to cost an absolute fortune. It's not that much. It's about 30 or 40 pounds in today's market. But what does cost a lot of money is the staff resource. Now, at ZSL, we're privileged because we've got a whole team of vets and vet nurses that work full-time at both of our zoos. But when ZSL staff are contracted to another collection to do a general anaesthetic, it costs £600 for 3 hours. So that's basically the cost of a general anaesthetic if you don't have your own vets. And just to give you a small resource comparison and anaesthetic or training, I'm going to use the giraffe foot care that was done as an emergency procedure. It was an emergency procedure because the animal became quite lame, and so it needed to be placed under general anaesthetic to treat the foot. And that took 11 vet staff, including external consultants, plus 11 keepers to make sure the animal was safe as it became recumbent. You can compare that with trained behavior. And here's the point: at Whipsnade Zoo, they've been training proactively for several years in order to maintain good foot health. And here you can see one of the end results of that, which is actually these are 3 zookeepers together working on that training program. And in this video, you can see some of the results. So first of all, in a proactive way, the vets and keepers managed to train for voluntary X-ray on a small block. And this information gave the vets the knowledge which they needed in order to make some interventions, and those interventions including trimming. And you can see Fika here doing some nice trimming. And after that, the keepers then were able to train for this foot roll on a larger block. And this enables them to take pictures, which means that they can continually monitor the health of the feet, and they can file as well without having to do real heavy interventions with the animals. And this is the result: a nice healthy hoof there. So we can replace expensive and high-risk medical interventions all the time if we proactively train, but also if we train reactively. And this is an example of that with Thug, our pygmy hippo. This was a procedure done in about 2005, and as you can see, it's quite dramatic. Cheese wire being used there to trim the teeth of the animal. And here is the alternative. So some really simple open mouth behavior and desensitization to the Dremel, and that can be done once a week just to maintain the tooth care of that individual. So taking a look at the end here at darting versus hand injection, and I wanted to have a look at this just to show a couple of comparative points of view. So here we have our African wild dogs. This animal was herded into the enclosure and separated from individuals, and this is important because when an animal is placed under general anaesthetic in the wild dogs, they need to be separate. And as you can see, there's quite a dramatic effect when these dogs are darted. The alternative of going to vaccinate is you can hand inject outside in amongst the group, as you can see Nick and Luke doing here. And if you want to do a general anaesthetic, then you can train for isolation. And we chose to do that in a crate. And so we train for isolation, crate, and then we can hand inject in a specially designed aperture at the side there. So some testimonies. So I'm very grateful to Stamos and Heather, my colleagues at the Wildlife Health Services, for contributing to this presentation. And Stamos describes prescribing higher doses for an animal to be darted. And in fact, 20 to 40% less anaesthetic drugs can be used. So it's much cheaper. And Heather says, if you like, the side effects. So the effects of darting is always more stressful for the lion as they recognize the person, the equipment used. So when they're trained, their anesthetics are smoother, and we definitely use less injectable drugs, as Stamos showed. And perhaps most importantly, those animals can be trained the very next day. They could be ejected again. And if you can imagine trying to get your animal into that area in order to be darted again the next day, it's just a nightmare. So training proactively for preventative health monitoring can minimize the need for costly anesthetics and emergency procedures. And that can be as simple as weighing your animal to keep an eye on condition and physical exams for the same reason. Or it can be a bit more dramatic. Just like here, you can see Heather showing us a proactive preventative health monitoring program with our Asiatic lions. And this is a simple stationing behavior and some desensitization to the vet nurse at the rear end, a tail grab, and then a blood withdrawal. And this whole process enables us to keep a very close eye on these animals without the need for emergency procedures or expensive and risky general anaesthetics. So I just want to point out again that there are economic values and benefits to zoo animal training, but they should be secondary because the welfare benefits are so important. And there's some other things. Annette has pointed out the increased public perception, improved visitor experience, but staff morale is a really important thing. The keepers that I work with absolutely love training the animals, and I think it's a really important thing to point out that the keepers are there not just to do the nutrition side of things and the husbandry, they're there to do research, observe the animals, train and enrich them. And so they're not additional members of staff. They work for the zoo already. So they're a brilliant resource. And I'd just like to say thanks very much to Henrik and Annette at Copenhagen, to my colleagues in the Wildlife Health Services team, Mark, Noose, Cass and Emma at the Hoofstock team at Whipsnade Zoo, and everyone on the EAZA Animal Training Working Group for the opportunity to share this presentation. Thanks very much, and enjoy Barbara's brilliant talk that's coming next.